Our next speaker is Minister-Councillor Rodrigo Santos from the Embassy of Brazil. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Minister Rodrigo. We're very lucky, I think, to have an actual representation from one of the BRIC countries here. He has been a diplomat for 18 years with various posts around the world relating to finance and infrastructure. Comes from an economics background, and sure will give us some very useful insight to the unique energy growth situation in Brazil.
Thank you very much. Well, good evening. First of all, I'd like to, on behalf of the Brazilian Embassy, to thank the Imperial College, specifically the Imperial College Energy Society and Brazil Forum for inviting me here for this panel, very important panel. I also congratulate my co-panelists here. I have to say that I'm not an energy specialist, but what I'd like to do is give you just a brief introduction for some important elements of the Brazilian policy in regards to energy in general, in some of our position, what we are doing, what we think we could do together, including with the UK, in some cooperation as well. I have to say that I have learned a lot with Professor Ekins' presentation, and that we agree in most of your points that you have showed to us. Well, but let me start showing you something that it's important for us to take into consideration. When we are talking about energy policy, of course, we cannot dissociate energy policy, and as Professor Ekins was saying in the beginning of his presentation, of some important elements of any country. And the population, of course, area as well, because if we think about distribution and connectivity, and also, of course, economic growth. And this is just to show you that Brazil, together with the USA, Russia, and China, for example, and Brazil, Russia, and China being most of the BRICS, we have this challenge, very big challenge in terms of those, let's say, economic and social factors. A big country with a population of more than 120 million. In the case of Brazil, we have a population of almost 200 million people, and also with a rapid economic growth. We had last year a small decrease in our economic growth, but we expect that this year and the following years will resume economic growth in an average of between 4 to 5%. So this, of course, it's a big challenge in terms of economic management, but also in terms of energy policy. Well, and what are the principles and goals of the Brazilian energy policy? Those are the most important ones. Of course, as any other country, the security of supply, and this means also having, as I said, a connectivity amongst the different regions in Brazil. As you can see in the map, Brazil is a big country, so we have we used to call isolated areas in the north, specifically. Usually, the most advanced areas in Brazil, most regions are in the southeast and south, which were already very well, let's say, had a very good supply of energy, but the north and northeast they lack some investments, and that's what the Brazilian government is doing now. But we have already worked in an interconnectivity of generation, so transmission lines that go from north to south. So when we have some droughts, for example, because I will show you later on that most of energy supply in Brazil is based in the hydropower plants. So when there are droughts here in this region, we can send energy from south to north. So this interconnection of power generation was very important investment that Brazil did in the last years. But other principles and goals, of course, it's the energy cost, especially for a developing country such as Brazil. We need to not only to assure the supply of energy, but also at a reasonable cost for economic development and social development as well. And that's the third point I'd like to highlight, is the universal service providing. So Brazil, as any other developing country, have a tremendous challenge in social development. Brazil, you probably are aware of the economic growth and development that we have achieved lately, but we had a lot of things to do in terms of social development. So to guarantee also energy, not only for our industries and economy in general, but also to the whole population, it's such a big challenge for us, and is of course reflected in our energy policy as well. Of course, we are saying here respect to existing agreements. This means to have a positive and a business scenario, investment scenario, so we can attract more private sector as well, engagement in the supply of energy and distribution of energy as well. The strengthening of planning, this is something the Brazilian government is doing, keep on its priorities, together with institutional cooperation with other countries as well. But also the diversification of the matrix with the use of renewable energies. We are going to see later on in another slide more specific how this diversification works. The national integration, I have already mentioned the connectivity of the north and south transmission lines. National technological development as well. I also will show you some of our technological development, for example, in biofuels. Brazil was a pioneer in this technology, and it has contributed a lot for the Brazilian energy matrix. And, of course, commitment to social and environmental issues. This is a principle, it's a priority in Brazil, as I said, not only what we call the social inclusion, social development, but also respect and trying to implement a sustainable development, economic growth, but also energy policy. So how is the Brazilian energy matrix? Well, the renewable share of the Brazilian energy matrix is very impressive. You can see that most of our energy matrix today comes either from biomass or hydropower plants, as I said. Today, the share of renewable energy in the Brazilian energy matrix is almost 46%. That was figures of 2011, last year's figures. We intend to increase this in 2020, so in just 8 years' time. That was the plan from 2010 to 2020, to up to almost 48%. So it's almost a 2 or 3% increase in the share of renewables in our energy matrix. You can see that compared to OECD countries or the rest of the world, Brazil has a very impressive figure of renewables in its as responsible for its energy matrix, which is something very favorable to the country. Well, what about as I mentioned before, the 10-year planning of the Brazilian energy supply mix? As I said, there is the estimate that we will increase from 45.4 to 47.7 in renewable. Whereas the rest of the world, in average, the renewables represent around 13%. And again, these are figures of 2009. But traditionally, Brazil has had a very important share of its energy matrix from renewables, because, as I mentioned also, most of it comes from hydropower plants. And lately, in the last 20 or 30 years, sugarcane and biomass also has increased its participation. What about the electricity matrix? Again, the renewable share is even more impressive when we see the electricity generation in Brazil. Most of it, almost 91% last year, came from either the nuclear, hydro, biomass, or other renewables. And as I mentioned, hydropower plants, hydropower generation represents almost 82%. So this is very important to Brazil. Compared to other countries as well, or to other regions or group of countries, you can see that there's a big difference. So Brazil is very well positioned in terms of renewable share in the electricity matrix. It doesn't mean that we don't have problems and challenges. Of course, we do have challenges in terms of sustainability, environmental protection, social inclusion. So some of the elements that I would like to talk a little bit later. And what about the 10-year plan for the Brazilian electricity supply mix? Also, we see an increase of 86 to 87. So you can say, well, just 1%, but it's 1% based on a larger GDP, larger economic output. So it's also very significant when we think about what Brazil can keep and even increase the participation of or the share of renewable sources on its electricity supply. Well, according to the International Energy Association, IEA, today electricity generation is responsible for around 40% of the CO2 emissions in the world. Because coal is a predominant source of electricity generation around the world. So that's why it's so important in Brazil that we have these sources of renewable as the base of our electricity supply. Talk specifically about our hydropower installed capacity. Also, you can show here. I can show you here that we have used so far. Only in the south of Brazil, we have used more than 50% of our hydropower capacity. So Brazil still has a lot of room to grow using the hydropower as a base for its energy matrix and the electricity generation, which is very positive. Other countries too have, they have room to grow in the hydropower capacity, but they are not so, in terms of relatively, what they represent, the hydropower generation to the energy matrix of those countries are not so important as it is in Brazil. So we have installed only 31% of our total national potential in hydropower plant, in hydropower generation. So it's also an important figure to take into consideration. So that's why Brazil still sees hydropower generation as a priority and as an important supply of energy and electricity for us. What about bioenergy? Also, bioenergy, Brazil has been leading some initiatives in bioelectricity, bioethanol, and biodiesel, which are very important. After the first oil shock crisis in the 70s, the Brazilian government decided to invest a lot in the ethanol. And we, together with our agriculture research company called Embrapa, government-managed company linked to the Minister of Agriculture, they have developed very important technologies in terms of not only producing the ethanol, and later on, together with the industry, what we call the flex fuel engines. So today we have in Brazil 48% of the flex fuel of the fleet of light vehicles in Brazil runs with flex fuel, which also, of course, contributes to CO2 reductions. But also, what I'd like to highlight that this program of bioethanol and bioelectricity and biodiesel have also a very important social impact because of job generation. Usually, our local communities that are involved. For example, in bioelectricity, is not only the cogeneration, because the unit ethanol producers, for example, they use their own energy that produced with the biomass to supply energy to their units, but also they are already including this in the electricity grid, so they are exporting, let's say, energy to other regions, to other parts of the country. So this also has been increased, and it's very important to take into consideration. As I was saying, this is some flex fuel and the key numbers of Brazilian sugarcane sector. I mentioned before the sugarcane bioelectricity represents 2% of the Brazilian electricity matrix, and the estimate is that by 2020 it can reach 18%, which is also very significant. And another important element is that the complementarities. The cane harvest occurs during the dry season, when hydroelectric reservoirs are low and marginal sources of electricity are needed. So this also represents another advantage of the development of the ethanol industry, the ethanol industry in Brazil. This is just to give you some comparison and about the advantage of the sugarcane ethanol. You can see that the productivity of the sugarcane in Brazil, this is liters per hectare. So in Brazil, this is also can explain why the Brazilian ethanol was so successful, because of its high productivity. So we produce 7,000 liters per hectare, whereas in the US, with the corn ethanol, they produce around 3,800. In the EU, with wheat, 2,500. And also in EU, with the sugar beet ethanol, it's 5,500. But this is also something that I'd like to highlight. The greenhouse gas reduction. And these are not numbers from Brazilian government. These are numbers from international institutions, including the Institute of the International Energy Association. So the sugarcane ethanol can reduce, can cause or have a positive effect on the reduction of greenhouse gases between 61 to 91%, whereas the others have a lower contribution on CO2 reductions. So that's why Brazil is insisting, and this is very important in terms of our role in the international community, what we are doing, what we are trying to do in international negotiations, is to what we would like to see is as ethanol as to be considered as an energy commodity and not as an agriculture commodity. Professor Ekins has mentioned the subsidies for example, fossil fuels. According again to the International Energy Association, those subsidies, they reach $700 billion for the production of fossil fuel, whereas the renewables, everything that all over the world has been invested so far, reach only $100 billion. So we cannot understand how renewable energy has not had so far the same attention, the same kind of investments or subsidies that are being given to fossil fuels, and why there are so many trade barriers to ethanol, for example, because ethanol is being considered as an agriculture commodity and not as an energy commodity. So it should have an incentive and not obstacles for its development. And of course, Brazil is developing international cooperation as well. In Africa, for example, there have been some debates over this controversy about food and biofuels, whether this would disrupt food production. For example, in African countries, you don't see like this. In Brazil, we had in the past and today still a rapid growth in productivity in grain productions, and at the same time, we have increased our ethanol production as well. So they are not necessarily, if you have to grow, if you have to increase ethanol production, you have to decrease food production. Brazil is an example using this technology and high productivity that we can have both things. We can increase food production and at the same time increase renewables, in this case through ethanol production. And that's what we would like to see with some African countries. They have a lot of similarity in terms of land, weather, climate with Brazil. And they're already giving them some technical assistance so they can increase their biofuels production as well. Just very quickly, just to show that wind power potential also is very important in Brazil, and the Brazilian government is focusing now as well in its energy policy to invest more in wind power potential. And almost finalizing my presentation, just to show you that also the future energy matrix in Brazil, what we are doing using platform power plants, which have much less impact, environmental impact, because this has been a criticism that usually environmentalists say that the hydropower plants have a very big impact in the environment, and they were able to build a new kind of technology, to develop a new kind of technology that's platform power plants that has a reduced impact in the environment. And Brazil is actually working together with the International Energy Association in a guidelines for reducing more and more the environmental impact of the hydropower plants. Well, of course, biofuels, bioelectricity, hydrogen, urban solid waste, photovoltaic, and electricity transmission are some investments of, as we can see, our future energy matrix. And of course, also efficiency, energy efficiency, that we'd like to introduce more and more in Brazil, especially in the distribution. Brazil doesn't have a lot of problem in the efficiency in the transmission lines. What we lack is more investment in the distribution, and also there's an important cooperation that we can have with the UK, for example, with the smart grids and other clean technology that can facilitate this energy efficiency. Well, I have to mention, of course, the oil industry in Brazil as an important, and it will become more and more important to Brazil. Because of our findings in the pre-salt region in Brazil, Brazil will become a very important oil producer. So going from 2 million barrels per day to 5 million barrels per day in the next 10 years. So we will present a very important, of course, part of our energy policy, but we will keep investing, and the priority on the biofuels will remain in the policy of the government. Just to mention the program, that the social inclusion that I mentioned before, very important. The government has introduced this program, which is called Light for All. It means that we are, as I said in the beginning, giving access, supply to small communities, local communities that before they didn't have any kind of electricity, and now they can benefit from the investments that are being made by the government and the private sector as well. So now to just the last slide is just to show you some investments. What are the energy plan investments for the future up to the 2020? So of course, oil and gas represent a big share of it because of these findings in the pre-salt region. But still, if you see the electricity and the biofuels investment amount up to $210 billion in the next 10 years. So it shows the priority that Brazil is giving as well to electricity, power generation, transmission, and biofuels. So I'm sorry that I have to run, and of course I'll be most welcome to receive some questions from the audience. And again, I'd like to strengthen that Brazil is open for the debate in terms of the importance of the renewables and the technologies that we can develop together with other countries. And there's been a lot of cooperation with this country, with the UK. Next month, for example, we'll have a bilateral government-to-government roundtable on innovation, and energy, clean technology for energy will be one of the topics of this roundtable, and of course of the cooperation with Brazil and UK. Thank you very much. Thank you.